my mom always sort of says, sometimes your job is to be the witness and not the fixer of people's lives. And so our intention as an eight, and you talk about this and I love it and I say it all the time, but like that marshmallow wrapped in barbed wire, the insides, the intention is so good and pure and like it's motivated by I don't want you to be harmed. Like I don't want me to be harmed. I want everybody to be safe and okay. And sometimes it limits us from allowing people in our lives to be seen by us. And because we're so strong and because we're so protective, people can feel really safe with us if we allow for there to be safety. The people that you want to help and be close with the most are not going to be able to be close to you if you're solving their problems.
Welcome back to Enneagram in Real Life, a podcast where we explore how to apply our Enneagram knowledge in our daily lives. I'm your host, Steph Barron-Hall, and today you've already heard a snippet of this excellent episode. So I'm speaking with Lauren Cañafranca. And Lauren is an accredited financial counselor in Canada, a speaker, and a joyful money coach. And she specializes in serving those who have variable income and anyone who's looking to develop a stronger relationship with their money. Lauren is an Enneagram 8 and a rugby coach, as well as a mother to 3. So on today's episode, we'll be talking all about how she explored her Enneagram type, how she really found her Enneagram type and felt at home with it, and then how she actually kind of applies her Enneagram knowledge in her work as a money coach. Lauren shares her story about going from 6 figures of debt and transforming not only her financial life, but also her career, and how she is a helper in the strongest sense of the word, as many Enneagram 8s actually are. So especially if you are familiar with the subtypes, social 8 subtypes quite often find themselves in helping professions. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what control really means for an Enneagram 8, a more gentle perspective toward financial health as self-care, and Lauren's experience working with clients, as well as how to connect with her. And you might have noticed at the top that Lauren mentioned that marshmallow wrapped in barbed wire quote, which I have heard most often from my teacher, Beatrice Chestnut. So with that said, I want to make sure you know where to contact Lauren if you're interested in working with her. If you're somebody like me who has a lot of variable income, then Lauren is a great place to look for resources and to work one-on-one. So her website is elbie.coaching.com. So it's ELBIE coaching.com. And she's on Instagram at ELBIE.coaching. And you can also find all of those links in the show notes. So without further ado, here is our lovely Enneagram 8 this week, Lauren Cañafranca. Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited for you to be here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited as well.
I would love to chat a little bit about your background, because I know that you are a financial coach, and you're going to have to give me some more, not financial coach, right? That's not right.
I'm a financial coach, but I'm also a counselor.
Okay.
So I say counselor first and then coach second.
Okay, cool. So you're going to have to give us the rundown on all of that. And I'd love to also hear a little bit about your Enneagram type and where that came along in your journey. I know a little bit about your background, but I'm excited to hear more.
Yeah. Well, my name is Lauren Cañafranca, and I'm an Accredited Financial Counsellor Canada. So that means I have a specialization in Canadian finance, and I come to money sort of from a counselor's perspective versus sort of the business side of money coaching, which is go get them. And I'm more about the touchy-feely, let's try to surrender some of this shame that we have around this thing that everybody kind of has to deal with all the time, and do it without judgment of ourself, of others, of our circumstance. And then I call myself a joyful money coach, because sometimes people are looking, the line between counseling and therapy we want to sort of stay, but on the line between counseling and coach. So we want to stay on that side. We can't really help with anything that's considered dysfunction or a condition of like financial anxiety, or a condition of enmeshment or something like that is outside of my scope. So I focus on security, gratitude, and joy with money. And I got here because of my own experience with money, my own financial journey. And I don't know if I'm saying my type right away, but
Go for it.
like an 8, instead of looking up and identifying that I'm in trouble here financially, I have 6 figures of debt. I'm about to have my 3rd child. I don't know what I'm going to do. Instead of letting anyone know I was having a hard time or struggling, I decided, heaven forbid, ask for help and receive it. I decided to study personal finance very considerably. I thought, I'll just learn everything there is to know about it, and I'll use my anger to fuel that journey. And I will dive into cash flow theory, and I will learn everything that there is to know about fixing this situation. I'm not going to go ask for help from somebody who could help me. I'll just do it myself. And that was a long journey into sort of from like avoidance, which is my wing, and just sort of like blinders on to this situation, to like suffocating control. Like I'm gonna like manage every single penny, and I'm going to tear down anyone who gets in my way, including my partner, including my family. Like, no, you can't spend $4 on a drink. Like, absolutely not. We're fixing this thing. We got into this mess. We're going to get out of this mess. And it was just such a horrifying 18 months that I spent sort of in that state of just like blind rage, blind rage. And eventually, the nice thing about anger is anger eventually burns out. And eventually you get too tired to be so angry, and you go, yeah, I paid off $30,000 of debt. I still have $70,000 of debt. And like I don't have enough energy to keep going like this.
Yeah.
So there has to be a gentler way or a different way. And sort of around that time is when I discovered the Enneagram.
And then you're like, oh, I see what's happening here.
Oh boy. Yeah. No, the Enneagram was like, it was one of those things that you can't unsee it. I was this stereotypical, when I took a test, it was like one of those free online tests, and it gives you, the numbers 1 to 9, because we have all the types within us, but we have our propensities. And I was like 91% an 8, and no other number even broke 60%. Like, it was just like,
Wow.
There was like this little bar, and this like stuck straight out. And I was like, okay. And it was one of those sites that doesn't really tell you anything about it. It just sort of gives you the outline. And then I had to go do some digging later, and I was like, oh no. Oh no. So I think, we'll talk about it, but I think that it was absolutely a turning point in my life, discovering this Enneagram and discovering who, like, the other numbers that were around me and who I allowed in my circle, and who would trigger me, and, really resonated with that body type, that anger, those sorts of things, and identifying like, oh, those, the heart types really trigger me.
Yeah. Ooh. Oh, we'll get into that.
Yeah, it's gonna be spicy.
No, I do want to jump back really quickly to something that you mentioned, because you're in Canada. I can't remember which area though.
I'm in Alberta.
Alberta.
Don't tell
okay.
anybody.
Well,
It's like the Texas of Canada. Yeah.
well, I'm from Texas, so there we go.
Okay, good. Then we're
buddies.
alike. Yeah, we're alike.
Yeah, but I'm curious because I think in the United States we actually put like counselor on the therapy side of the line, and coach on the other side. But it sounds like, and I've heard this from other people from Canada, but like counseling and coaching are more similar. Like counseling's not regulated versus therapy.
Yeah, it's like that. We do have licensed counselors, I'm an accredited counselor. So it's like there's like a small therapy is very protected and counselor's not as protected. And so, and it's the difference being that I can really make suggestions and give you like direct instructions about what I think might help versus therapy is really more of that exploration of self. And you do get advice and things in therapy, but we can't give that sort of advice.
Like trauma work and
Yeah. Like I can't really touch that. I can't really say like, I'll help you with your financial trauma. We might talk about where you're, from your childhood things, how money was talked about and how that might be showing up in your relationships now. But that's going to be totally driven by you and not necessarily, I'm not necessarily going to be able to say like, I can fix that. I might even refer you out to someone if there's something that's sticking out that keeps coming up. I might have to say, this is something that you could bring to a therapist and I think you'd benefit a lot from it.
Yeah. That's kind of how I approach those things too. It can be really challenging because especially when you're working with something that is so emotional, like no matter what anyone says, money is emotional.
Oh, yeah.
You
It's
know?
like, 5% tactical and 95% emotional. Like it is totally emotional.
Yeah. And the Enneagram too. And so you're delving into those topics naturally. And so you have to be really ethical about it. And that can, it's been a thing that I've just had to release. I don't know what it's like for you, but over the past couple of years, I've just had to be like, you know what? I don't have answers. I have good questions. And I can help you on these different things, but like, I'm not going to be able to solve your trauma. And like, that is okay because that's not my role,
Yeah.
Of just having a lot more humility with all of that.
Yeah. I started coaching rugby this year and all of the athletic coach programs and training that I've taken really is like, are you coach centered or are you player centered? And your player or your client has a lot of the answers already. They just need a safe place to be able to process them, maybe for the first time out loud, to be able to actually identify, oh, I didn't even realize how much anxiety that was causing me, or I didn't even realize how that was affecting my marriage or my my relationship with my sister or my relationship with my friends who make more money than me or whatever it is. I didn't even notice.
Yeah. And then the real work begins, right?
Oh boy, yeah. It's like then you find out the Enneagram, you find out your Enneagram type, and then you have a little meltdown, and then the work begins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about what you were doing before you kind of delved into this, into the financial counseling aspect of your business? And then I'd love to hear a little bit more about like kind of how you work with this with your clients.
Yeah. Well, before I did financial counseling, I was a massage therapist. So it's sort of, I think as an 8, you sort of like the power differential of like, I will help you and you will tell me your problems. And, and so I did a lot of that sort of like massage therapy in those rooms. And the biggest or most common thing that people who are willing to be vulnerable with me would share was, I have no idea what I'm doing with my money, or I've filed bankruptcy and I'm about to be released from this and I'm terrified. I have no idea. I just feel like I'm going to go straight back here. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And to me, it felt like a really natural, because I was sort of going through my own journey and I could relate to that. It felt like a really natural next step for my helping journey. You can only massage for so long.
Yeah.
But I discovered the Enneagram through Chelsea Handler.
Oh,
I've always like related to Chelsea Handler.
Right.
She was like, had her show, and then she like freaked out during the Trump administration and like quit her show. And she wrote the book, Life Will Be the Death of Me. And that's the first place I really ever heard of the Enneagram. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And so I listened to her podcast, and her psychiatrist, Dan Siegel, was on, and he talks about like patterns of developmental pathways or something. He was really talking about the Enneagram from like a brain perspective. And that piqued my interest because I never really related to personality typing before, like nothing's ever been like, oh, I'm very awake now. But this Enneagram is why I took a test, and really, it really piqued my interest. And I went around this time, I went camping with my family. And this is where like, it was like, okay, like this is sort of, I have this little, I'm an 8. Yeah, okay. But I went camping, and it was the springtime, and the river where my parents have some property was flooding. And there were these geese that were nested across the river. And every hour, the water is rising, and I'm so stressed about these geese eggs that are across the river. Like, I just can't. I was like, oh, I like couldn't sit down. I was like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to fix this? Like, I need to fix this situation. I can't tolerate it. And nightfall comes, and I have to try to sleep, and I'm not sleeping. And I get up in the morning, and I make a coffee, and I go outside, and I look, and the geese have hatched. And I was like, oh, good. Like, now I can relax, right? Like, now they can just like go to higher ground. Everything will be fine. And I'm watching, and this little goose family, I don't know, get on the river. They just like brand new babies, like hatched overnight or this morning. Let's just like go for a swim on this river that's historically as high as it's ever been. It's like raging. And they just like jump on. And so I like drop my coffee, and I'm running down the riverbank, which is a ridiculous choice. And I'm yelling at my family. Like, I got so mad. I'm immediately like projecting. I'm like, stupid dad goot. Like, I just was like, why would you do this? And I'm yelling at my family, like, Dad, we got to get that geese. Like, I'm screaming at everybody, like anybody, like out of my way. I don't know. I'm going to swim across a raging river to a web-footed bird and who's notoriously mean, and save the day. Like, I don't know what I was exactly planning, but that fight or flight was like, I'm going to rescue this situation. And I got to the end of the bank where I could sort of like, as far as I could run, and the geese just like got off the river and tootled up the other bank. And I was just like sweating, and I was like, you idiots. Like, I was so mad at these geese. And my dad came up to me, which is very annoying because he's very insightful. And he said, honey, what would have happened if you weren't here? And in that moment, I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, what kind of question? Why would you ask me that right now? Like, and he's like, they're going to have to fly thousands of kilometers, and you're not going to be able to control it. And it, honestly, I was 31. I can't even remember now. And it was the first time in my life that I had the realization that I might be controlling.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my husband because he was at home. And I was like, honey, I think I might be controlling. And he's just quiet, like. And I was like, hun. And he's like, yeah. Like, of course you are. Like, what do you mean? And I was like, no, like, I think I might have a control problem. And he was like, oh yeah, of course you do. And that was like, at the time, felt a little bit like a betrayal, because like, why wouldn't you tell me that? Like, if I was that unaware, why would you not say something? Like, I've been walking around with mud on my face my whole life, our whole relationship, and you didn't tell me. And he's like, well, honey, people who have control issues don't usually like being told they have control issues. I was like, like, eventually I sort of came around to that, but it's control in a different way than maybe like what I thought control was. It's not necessarily control in the like, staple it like this and fold it like this and put it here and you have to cook it this way. It's more like, it's too vulnerable for me to witness you in pain or suffering. So I'm going to need you to move out of the way, and I'm going to fix it.
Yeah.
Right. It's control in the, I can't allow you to help me because then I'm going to be obligated to you. And like, when does that end? like, I don't like that. I don't like this sort of strings attached to our interactions.
Yeah.
And eventually I learned sort of more recently that it's control in the way that I'm a bit of an underachiever, because then I can control the outcome of that, right? The perfectionism of I just won't even start that because then I know what the outcome's going to be. And that might be a bit of a 9-wing thing where it's a little bit avoidant and a little bit of that. But I always sort of saw control more as like a 1, like that perfectionist, like it has to be
Right.
just right, sort of sense of control. And so that for me has sort of been the biggest revelation. And that's why is such a turning point in my life, was identifying like how I was being perceived by others when I sort of viewed it as like helping and fixing and
Yeah.
sorting it out, it was that sort of a version of what I thought I
Yeah.
was doing.
What was it like for him to hear you have that revelation?
I think for him, and since then, it's been a really valuable experience for our relationship. I think he was just really confused. Like he was really surprised that I was so unaware, because I would have argued that I was self-aware. I would have argued that I was laid back even. And that just like makes people laugh now when I say that. And like now they're like, you like can be chill, but you're not
Yeah.
laid back. Like that would never come up. And that's, how I would identify myself. I would have said that before. And how my husband would identify. I asked him recently, like, how would you describe me in 3 words? And he said, loving, intense. And I was like, okay. And then he said, and now I think empathetic.
Yeah.
But a lot of years ago, it would have just been like a little bossy, a little
Yeah.
pushy, you know, controlling.
Yeah, well, and I can see how that can, like, what you felt like compassion, or like the feeling that you had, even I think it's, doing something so physical like being a massage therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the power differential that you mentioned, but also like using your body
Yeah.
to instill like health and wellness into somebody else's body.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm compassionate. I am fixing it.
I'm a helper.
But now you're like, no, yeah. But now you're like, no, empathy is being with this person in it.
Empathy is witnessing this. And more, I always, surrender is a little bit too, not a word I'm quite ready to embrace, but like allow is sort of where I
Yeah.
go. And even just, in the physical body, when you're trying to remove stress, you can like hammer it, which creates more stress on the body. Or you can approach it, a little more from the side and allow the body to respond to that touch. And you're going to get way more of a positive outcome. And the same thing with money. You can go from completely ignoring it to hammering your budget and never letting anybody have any fun and saying no to everything. Or you can try to find a middle ground and take gentle steps in the direction you're trying to head rather than going full steam.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you, like, was this Enneagram thing then the transition for you? Because you were so, like, forgive me if
Intense.
this is like a swear word, but it was a little Dave Ramsey-esque,
Oh, yeah,
maybe?
yeah, yeah. No, it is a swear word.
Yeah.
I am not a Dave Ramsey fan, and I never really went full Dave Ramsey. That
Yeah.
was though one of the first personal finance people that I ran into, because his entity is so big in the personal finance world. But because I don't sort of identify as Christian, it never really resonated in the same way. I think I sort of got a little lucky that way. But I did do you got to do nothing but pay your debt.
Yeah.
You made this, you need to suffer until you've paid your debts, and I did kind of take that on. And then it took meeting different financial professionals like Dr. Michael Thomas, who is an instructor. I don't want to say if he's an instructor, if he's a professor. I think he's a professor at Georgia Tech, I think. And he talks about financial empathy. And Lindsay Bryan Podvin of Mind Money Balance talking about financial anxiety and this shame-free approach, and that you don't have to do it so angry. And they were really they're sort of models that I kind of use, and we can approach this in a way where it's centered around the person and not centered around the like tactical outcome of the dollars and cents.
Yeah.
Because we don't all have to have perfect financial books. We need to be able to approach our money and feel safe doing so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because when I hear, I'm pretty sure that I've heard that Dave Ramsey's an 8. And when you hear the fixation of vengeance, which actually one of the financial people that I really like, Ramit Sethi, I think that he's also an 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that.
But you see a very different version of 8, right? Because different education, different things that they've done. But like you see a lot of the vengeance in the way, and I'm like afraid actually now. I'm like, should I talk about Dave Ramsey?
Yeah, there are some fans. Yeah, there's some fans.
I'm not saying like do whatever works for you. Anyone can find help and guidance in anything. But like, I think what we're talking about is like people who that approach doesn't really work for, or it's like filled with toxic shame, in which case we need to do something else. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that makes a lot of sense for you to be like, okay, let's have a different approach with this. Because it sounds like it's also a lot more effective for yourself and for your clients.
Certainly it is more long lasting, right? It's, akin to dieting. It's akin to, and diet culture, money culture and diet culture, and like all of the healthisms, and it becomes so individualistic. And if you aren't disciplined enough, then you're a failure. It's like, actually, there's so many variables, and money is so intertwined in all of our relationships and all parts of our life, that how could you possibly feel like you could just put this box around it and it's dollars in and dollars out, when really it's like, no, there's emergencies, and there's different cultural requirements, and there's different sociological and systemic issues that we have with money that we can't point to just ourselves. And I can't point at you and I can't point at me and say, this is how it's going to be. It's a more, everybody hates this word, but more like of a journey of developing a relationship that's reciprocal with money versus I'm the commander of this thing, which would be so much easier, wouldn't it? But it's just not the case.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think that that's like one of the really important things about all of these types of things that you are mentioning, like diet culture or whatever else, because it's like, well, what actually will work, right, in a sustainable way in real life, not just theoretically. But also something that you have mentioned before is, and even when we've talked previously, is about like, yes, the concept of empathy, but also the concept of boundaries. And one thing I love about my 8 friends is, we just have like I can be like, oh, what about this? And one of my closest friends is an 8, and she'll just be like, that's not for you to decide. That is not what we say. It ain't your shit to shovel. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not, it's not your problem. Right. And, I think that's really helpful for me, as a heart type, because I'm like, and the heart type who also has that same let me fix it energy, like everything that gets done is up to me, right? Like my fixation is all about that, right? Like I am the separate doer. I'm the one who makes things happen. And I think that boundaries around money can be hard because sometimes we think more in the self-discipline, self-control, like the more puritanical like perspective of it. But you're developing like something different with these boundaries. And I'm wondering how you bring that into your work with your clients.
Certainly, I think, initially when I started working with clients, my my type, I think, was something I felt like I had to overcome. I did a lot of pro bono work and a lot of like, will you let me try this with you? Um, because I had a lot of like, when people would say things similar, like to your friend, like, well, that's not your problem. Like, it would come across like a little bit too sharp for people. Like, I have to do this. No, you don't. Like, no. Like, it was just like a little bit too blunt, a little bit, you should do this, just do this. Like it was so simple to me. And then I would just say that to them. And it doesn't always get received well when you do that, when it's so obvious to you and so nuanced to them, because obviously you're not the person experiencing that thing. And so I think boundaries, when I'm working with a client, what eights are so strong at is I'm not going to take on your stuff like a heart-centered person, like a two might do. I'm not like, again, your shit is not mine to shovel. I'm not going to take on what your struggle is. So I'm quite good at separating time in a session with the rest of my life. I'm not carrying it too long. And I think I'm able to eventually ask questions, and really worked on like curiosity, and making sure that I was asking questions before I was solving other people's problems. And for example, someone that maybe is a one, they have this real sense of like how things ought to be financially in all parts of their life, but being able to ask them questions and then challenge, like, if it ought to be this way, then why isn't it working? And not being afraid of having those conversations with people. It's actually like kind of fun to have those conversations with people who are saying things over and over, and then like you keep telling me that this is right and true, and yet we're having this conversation. You're here with me as your counselor trying to work on this. So what can we tweak? What are you willing to adjust here? And with a type that's more like a six, or their challenges might be more in letting go, or allowing themselves to have a little bit more fun, or spend a little bit more, or worry a little bit less. What is enough for you? And I think the boundaries for those people, it need to just relax a little bit, to expand a little bit. Or I like working with nines, and I tend to work with a lot of nines, and a lot of times nines have abdicated their power away financially. I tend to work with a lot of nines that are in partnership, and they're trying to figure out their money because their partner has it all figured out, and they just can't seem to figure it out, and they're terrified of it. And so for them, really talking in partnership about, if our money is going to be separate, then this is mine to deal with and not yours to comment on. And as they step by step start to build a little bit more confidence in their ability to manage and interact with their money and make choices about their money, in a way that might upset someone else, is such a beautiful, like, that's the rise portion of my coaching program that I just love to watch. Is like, there's a bit of a breakdown, and then they start to go, oh no, I get to make the decisions about this. And a lot of the the more applied part of money is pretty simple. It's learning to have boundaries around, what am I willing to spend on? How do I talk to myself about what I'm spending on? Do I say, I can't afford that, I'll never afford that, that's not for me, I'm not worthy of that thing? Or do I say, I could do that, but I don't think that that's in alignment with what I'm focused on right now. I don't think I want to spend my money on that right now. Like
Yeah.
not badly enough, you know? And like, I love working with threes too, because like a lot of what I recommend for people is, especially at the beginning, is using like a prepaid product so that in an electronic world, we can put our spending money in one place and spend downward instead of upward. And threes do not like surrendering their credit card, or like, I will not have something that is obviously a prepaid thing. Like somebody
Oh
will
yeah, the image
notice
thing.
the
Yeah.
image of it being prepaid. Like they're just like, no, like there's no way that I'm letting go of my gold, whatever card. And it's like, well, if you want the balance of that to be less, we have to stop putting numbers on it. Like we have to
Yeah.
just, even for a period of time, like just or go cash. They'll go cash, but they won't do anything that's like prepaid.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I
that
just
makes
think,
sense.
yeah. And I mean, it just like, I love knowing about the Enneagram because I can sort of anticipate if they know that if they are able to identify with the Enneagram, I can kind of anticipate where things are going to be. So I don't know if that necessarily answers the boundaries for you, but I think when I know what somebody's type is, I'm able to like more quickly identify where they may or may not have boundaries and where there may or may not need to be a like a contract or a relax on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you're talking about that, what I also hear is like, speaking of Dan Siegel, is like the window of tolerance, like expanding your client's window of tolerance for maybe, for a nine, like you said, making a decision with their money that might upset somebody else. But
Yeah.
then they're like, oh, I actually can do this and I'm going to be okay.
And I
Like,
didn't die. Yeah.
yeah.
And
And then
nobody even
maybe
got that mad.
right. And like you just get more and more comfortable because you're expanding that window. I mean, I could imagine the challenge of that. I'd never thought of that about using something prepaid as a three, but it makes sense because it's like why you would use that because it's like kind of like the cash envelope system type
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
But who takes cash now? Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could imagine a three being like, they're going to see me using it.
Exactly. Like I don't want to have that card because people know what that is. Like if there's an awareness of, like here we use Coho, I recommend. And then what is the card that I recommend in the States? I always blank on the name, like SoFi or like, there's another one. But, if people know that it's something that is used for budgeting, they don't want to have that look. They don't want other people to know that there may be like not totally got it going on financially.
Right.
They're trying to keep that. And, they don't really want to even admit that that has to be a thing. They want to be like, oh, I can absolutely use my credit card and keep it under control.
Yeah.
Despite historically that not being the case.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, this is the thing with us as threes, like that we have to keep coming back to is like, whether or not somebody thinks something of you, good or bad, does not make it true.
Yes.
Like it does not change your reality. And the only person it harms is you.
Yeah.
And for me, that's been such a difficult but important learning.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that for any of the types, but threes especially. Like it matters so much. But it doesn't. Like it matters for you. But the rest of people are worried about themselves too. So they're not even really thinking about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think in my own journey, like again, there's that word, which I actually don't hate it. I'm like, yeah, it's a journey.
It
Just
is.
call me corny. I don't care. But like I have been doing all of this work, and especially like some of the people that I really like to listen to, they talk a lot about like, you have to be honest with yourself, because if you're not, you can't change anything. You can't fix anything.
You can't be
some of us fake
self-actualized.
good.
Yeah.
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 And like, I think some of us fake that we're better than we are. Some of us fake that we're worse than we are. You know, we all have these.
Stories.
Yeah. We love to tell ourselves.
Yeah. Really good at writing narratives that suit whatever mood we're in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how you see like financial health as a form of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
and like how those things are intertwined, because I think it's something that often gets missed. And when we talk about self-care, I think sometimes, you know, it gets trivialized a lot.
It gets conflated with self-indulgence, I think sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and for some types, taking the time to take care of yourself is, your external self doing the face masks. And like, I cut my hair short so that I would stop and look in the mirror before I left the house, because I would just like be like on to the next thing. Like, I'm just going. And I would just wear a ponytail every single day and never really like take a moment. The three is like cocking her head at me, but
Yeah, I
yeah.
definitely do my hair every single day.
But no, I spent most of my life like in a ponytail. I had long hair and it just like up out of my face. And I cut my hair so that I would have to spend a couple of minutes making sure my hair is not standing straight up. And that was for me. So I can relate to some of those sort of stereotypical types of self care where we do things to take care of ourselves, to nurture ourselves, to be loving inward, especially if we're someone who has sort of an external focus. But financial well being is so intertwined statistically. It like good financial outcomes are good health outcomes. And I think that we sort of forget how distracting it can be if our financial house is not in order. It affects our performance at work. It affects our relationships. I can attest firsthand how negatively avoiding your money can affect your relationship, and like over controlling your money can affect your relationships, both romantically, interpersonally, at work. Like you make more, I make less, that sort of thing can really affect you intergenerationally. You might come from a family where if you do well, everybody does well. And that's going to affect your psychology on how you approach doing well or
Yeah.
not. And I think the peace that can come from taking care of your financial house, the sleep quality that can improve when you're not worried about, whether your direct deposit's going to hit on the Friday or the Monday, like what day is it actually going to hit my bank account and when is that payment going to come out? And if you're really stressed about the little things, or I mean, it can go even the other way. I've worked with someone who had $100,000 sitting in a PayPal account,
Oh my God.
and it was just never going to be enough,
Yeah.
you know? And so really exploring that is going to be more than the money. It's going to be about more than money. It's going to be about your sense of security, safety, right? I talk about security, gratitude, and joy in money. And I think exploring your financial well-being and really like intentionally, whether it's like you said, just sitting down and paying your bill, like a six is going to probably want to pay their bills manually, and a one might want to automate everything and be super efficient. Whatever it is, like taking the time to set that up, or creating a ritual so that you sit down and you check your account when your paycheck hits, and you use your budgeting app, or have things automatically managed for you. That whatever the ritual is, whatever the practice is, can create a sense of security and stability for you in your life that will give you skills that spill out into other parts of your life. Learning how to talk about money, learning about how to, as an eight, being able to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't actually totally understand this,
Yeah.
which is really tricky to do. Or or I have to overcome now this. I was the one driving and I took my family over a cliff. And now I have to reconcile that. And turning and facing something like that can be really painful, but overall, the end result will be positive overall well-being versus the more you ignore it, the bigger it's going to get. And the more it's going to affect your patience, your temperament, your ability to relate and stay close, resentment. All of these other things will build up if we're not looking at the thing that's, an undercurrent. And it's money, but it's the undercurrent of all parts of our life. We can't escape it. It's like breathing.
Yeah. I'm curious if you ever have people who are like, money is a social construct. Like, I think, fives can kind of get into that. And it falls into this, like, let me just dissect this into disparate parts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, now we've just got molecules and it's just like nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it could present a challenge, like, or would that type of person just not come to you?
I have had 1 5. It was in partnership. They both, one couldn't really identify themselves in the Enneagram. So I don't know, you're not supposed to type others, but I'll call her a 4. And her partner, she was a 5. And it was very challenging for the 5 to sort of identify why it was, because it was that very much that narrative of like, this is a social construct. This should be ABC, and it's not. And I did everything that I was supposed to do. Went to school, did the thing, But it's harder to argue when you come out the other side of doing all the things that you were supposed to do, diving deep in your education and doing all the things, and then it not, like, A plus B didn't equal C. And so then what? And so that, I think, is sort of the biggest challenge for them to kind of come around to it. And it is having to sort of suggest that this is more than numbers, which is why we're not all millionaires. It's more than math.
Right.
You can't actually break it down to this is going to equal this. There's too many variables. You can't solve for that. And then you have to also recognize that you're having a relationship with money in relationship with someone else who has a totally different history and view of what money means, how it should be talked about, like whatever fears it kicks up for them. And so, yeah, I can see if, 5s definitely have a little bit more of a, I don't know, like, it's not cold. I don't know what the right word is, but it's more tactical. Like, it is just, and maybe they don't struggle as much because they just could, and that's why I don't see them as often. Yeah. Maybe they just sort of compartmentalize money as this thing and dollars in, dollars out. And that's just the way it is, and any number could be like that sometimes.
I think head types in general, but also especially 5s, are good at like reading a book and applying, like understanding. They don't need somebody else to teach them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense to me. But it also kind of brings up that other concept of like, what type of money did you have growing up? Because I know with my husband and I, we had very different, like, socioeconomic status growing up, right? And so even now people are like, oh my God, you've never been skiing? Like, shocked, like clutching their pearls. And I'm like, no. Like, where I come from, that's a rich people thing.
Yeah.
But then you can over-identify being like, I'm not a rich person. I don't do that, right? And then that presents a whole other type of problem.
Yeah. And then now I'm actually going to reject the thought of being money or having money, because that is going to other me. Mm-hmm. That's going to make me treat other people the way that I've been treated. And I would never want to do that. Right. The heart types are like, oh, I could never make someone else feel that way.
Yeah.
And it is Totally. It's so nuanced and fun. And that's what I like about it is it's sort of this like endless state of story. And so like it is absolutely like an English major thing, not a math major.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm curious, like, who do you work with? Like, who are the people who come and like say, Lauren, I want you to coach me, counsel me with my
Yeah.
money.
Oh, both. Yeah. Whatever. They're like, whatever. I just want to get help.
Help.
Help me. Help me.
Yeah.
Um, I specialize in variable income. I work with lots of people, primarily women. I've worked with some men. Um, and that's just, I think, maybe just what coaching, like men want to be coached by men potentially. I don't know if that's true, but that's just how it worked out for me. But they either make their money in infrequent time intervals. So they make their money all at once and then they have to try to get through 6 months before they're going to make money again. Or they make different amounts of money on a regular frequency. So people who work commission jobs, lots of artists, lots of creators, authors, um, comedians. I've worked with quite a few comedians, and that's, as you can imagine, very fun. They're the observers. They can be very cerebral, uh, and then but money, just the fact that there's a number associated with that just like freaks them right out. So I think people who are aware of the emotional part of money, they're aware that this is giving me an emotional response, and either I would like to stop that or I would like to explore that. And usually the ones who come in with the like, I would like this feeling to stop, we move into exploration. Like, why do you want it to stop so badly? And those are my eights often that are like, it's enough of that. Let's fix this right now.
Yeah.
I need this to be done because I'm mad. And I don't usually like to be mad at myself. And right now I am. And I don't like that.
Yeah.
I would rather be mad at someone else.
Yeah. Well, I guess that depends on the type because a lot of people would rather be mad at themselves. But yeah, the blame game can also be a really fun one. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it is really challenging. Like I used to have a, regular W-2 9 to 5 job. And then I moved into doing, my work now. And it's been like, woohoo, I have all this money. Oh, wait, now I have no money. Like it's very difficult to build inconsistency.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And the traditional methods of budgeting don't really work like you
no.
want them to work. No, they don't. They don't. You'll be disappointed. So you do have to sort of take a modern approach to budgeting, and you have to go, oh, woohoo, I have all this money. Now let me lob a bunch of this forward for when I don't.
Yeah.
I need a hill and valley fund that I can go tuck this away and know that eventually a deficit's on its way. It's sort of an inevitability, and I'll have somewhere to pull from when I need it.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is
that
a
makes sense.
hard habit to build alone.
Well, yeah, and I think sometimes my accountant's like, "So how much do you expect to make this year?" And I'm like, "Well, that is a great question."
Your guess is as good as mine.
Will I have a mental breakdown or not? That will greatly determine how much I make.
Yeah, yeah. There's way too many factors for me to be able to answer that question.
Yeah.
We'll see. And
Yeah.
I think there's lots of people that thrive on that, that there's excitement in that. You just need structure to help you.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram is sort of where I often hang out. And on my website, lvcoaching.com. But primarily on Instagram, my DMs are open. I love talking to people and answering when people are curious about like, what is this and what do you do and why am I doing this? I like having those conversations.
Cool. Yeah. I'll link everything up in the show notes. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you're like, oh, I really want to say this thing?
I think you had a question about advice for others when they start this journey, and And I think for eights, I don't know, maybe everybody feels this way. And I think I've heard you say that before, but everybody thinks they're the worst type, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading through that eight explanation, and it was just like, I was just, stereotypical. I was all of it. And I just thought, oh shit, like I'm an asshole. And I've been an asshole for 30 years. Like, what do I do now? And my mom always sort of says, sometimes your job, and she said it to me for 30 years, and it took me a long time to actually hear her. But sometimes your job is to be the witness and not the fixer of people's lives. And so our intention as an eight, and you talk about this and I love it and I say it all the time, but like that marshmallow wrapped in barbed wire, the insides, the intention is so good and pure, and like it's motivated by, I don't want you to be harmed. Like I don't want me to be harmed. I want everybody to be safe and okay. And sometimes it limits us from allowing people in our lives to be seen by us. And because we're so strong and because we're so protective, people can feel really safe with us if we allow for there to be safety. They're not going to cut, the people that you want to help and be close with the most are not going to be able to be close to you if you're solving their problems, if you're saying you should to them. And so try to develop curiosity. I remember when I first started, I was like, okay, you're not allowed to say or give any suggestions until you've asked 5 questions. I have to learn to assume I don't know the whole story yet, and I need to ask questions. Even something as simple as like, are you looking for feedback? Or are you just wanting to process this? And just that question as a like starting the conversation with your sister, because things are going to happen. Your sister's going to date a guy you absolutely hate, but she's 27 and she didn't ask your opinion. And like, I don't have to have an opinion, even though sometimes you do.
Yeah.
But take a load off. You don't have to have an opinion or a solution for everything. You can just sort of be the witness. Yeah. And that's a hard thing to move toward, but that's sort of what I continuously try to remind myself, that I'm here to be a witness, and I will have the effect that I mean to have in doing that.
Yeah. That's such beautiful advice, I think, too, because, or, encouragement even. Just, it's like, it's such a hard thing because it requires a level of slowing down and being able to be a little bit vulnerable of like not having like a snappy opinion for everything. That can be a way that eights are really tough. Like not knowing is so vulnerable. And so allowing that is
gave me shivers.
Questions.
I'm like, oh no.
Like, ugh.
I don't have the answer. And yeah, you're exactly right. Not knowing is so vulnerable. To be perceived as not competent and capable and in control is so vulnerable. And it just takes a lot of returning to your breath and just saying, you know what, I don't know. I'm really sorry that's happening.
Yeah.
And you're bound to go through things in your life where you will be completely powerless to fix it. There's going to be loss and hurt and things that you can't do anything about. And the more you practice on the little stuff, the easier those big things will be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have nothing more to say to that. That's just like such a great tidbit for eights. And I think too, for all of us who love to hop right in there and
help
make it happen, make it work, get it sorted.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay. I have 2 final questions that I love to ask everyone. So tell me about a book that has helped you, refreshed you, or shaped you in the past year.
The book that most recently has helped me is not out yet, but I got to read the advanced version. So I don't know when this will come out. It comes out in January, and it's called The Screen Time Solution. And it might, I know, and it's not really related to money at all, but it is related to intentionality. And I have three kids, and they're 10, 8, and 6. And we're sort of entering that like screen era where it could become a problem. And I'm just super grateful that I met Emily Churkin, who's the author, and I got to read her book and learn from her. Otherwise, ahead of this, so anybody who's a parent who, has a preteen or has kids who struggle with video games, or they struggle themselves with screen time, that one really this year has changed the trajectory of our family's life. We've really rooted in our family values and spending more time connecting versus being overwhelmed and numbing ourselves with screens. So that's a big one. And then as an 8, trying to not read only personal growth books. I started reading fiction for the first time, and I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, which is a YA book, but it's a beautiful story about seeing the ocean for the first time and becoming a new person and being able to like allow the color to come out from within you. And it's amazing. It's about an orphanage with these like magical children. It's cool.
Oh, so cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I have not heard of that. I'll have to check it out.
Come from left field on you.
Yeah. I think it's pretty typical for people to have like one self-help and one fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you want to have a little balance.
Yeah. And most people that I have on here are like in this zone of like, I used to think I was a self-improvement project, and now I'm realizing I'm a person. And so I need to enjoy my life a bit more.
Yeah.
Reading fiction helps us do that.
Totally. There's so much metaphor. And if you love metaphor and, if you're learning to be more reflective versus onto the next thing, like an 8 might want to do, it's beautiful to... There's another one called Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune, and it talks about crossing over and life after death and who are the people who help you do that. Like, it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. So there's lots of metaphor. Even I'm rewatching The Simpsons, and now as an adult who's cultivated some empathy, Homer Simpson, he just goes so hard for his family. I just like, oh, this poor man. No wonder he hates Flanders. Like, I just like rewatching it now with a little bit more compassion and a little bit more of an adult experience is very different.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's so funny. Okay, finally, what is a piece of advice that has really stuck with you?
This one is another nugget from my dad. And I remember when that anger starts to flare up, especially in experiences with other people. And they didn't cut you off. They only changed lanes. And that is like, and then, to add to it, and you avoided an accident. So why don't we be grateful that you're such a good driver, and that isn't what you want to hear when you're mad, but later it sinks in. You're like, oh, right. It's not happening to me. They didn't wake up and go, I'm going to cut her off today. It's just like, it just happened. They are, stay in your lane was my New Year's resolution for like 3 years. It's just like, focus on your own stuff. They're going to do their stuff. And you just focus on driving. Yeah.
Works on so many levels.
So many levels. So many ways. Yeah. I don't need to referee my kids. I don't need to, that's just something that's happening. And nobody needs me. And I don't have to solve anything. I can just keep moving.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Okay. Well, there are so many profound little nuggets, especially from your parents.
I know. It's one of my biggest privileges. My parents are my mom's a master Reiki practitioner, and like cool. My dad's a chiropractor, and they're just my dad's a 4. My dad's like very philosophical and very, very unique. And it is such a privilege to have them.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been delightful, and I hope that everyone will check you out in the show notes, because I'm going to be sharing, your socials, everything. And I think, I'm assuming that there are other people who are like me, who are listening to this, who are like, do have like variable income or whatever, and are just like, I need something different that's going to work differently for me.
Yeah. I even have an ebook called 7 Steps to a Joyful Relationship with Your Variable Income. If, getting counseling or coaching isn't necessarily, if you're a 5 and you just want to read it and you don't want anybody to tell you, but you do want to kind of solve it. I wrote an ebook, and there's audio if you're an auditory learner too. Audio is so fun. And so that's available on my website if you're more just want to have a little dabble and get sort of the tactical with a little bit of the emotional woven through.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. This was such a pleasure. I loved being here. Thank you, Steph.
Thanks so much for listening to Enneagram IRL. If you loved the show, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating and review. This is the easiest way to make sure new people find the show, and it's so helpful for a new podcast like this one. If you want to stay connected, sign up for my email list in the show notes, or message me on Instagram at 9typesco to tell me your one big takeaway from today's show. I'd love to hear from you. I know there are a million podcasts you could have been listening to, and I feel so grateful that you chose to spend this time with me. Can't wait to meet you right back here for another episode of Enneagram IRL very soon. The Enneagram in Real Life podcast is a production of 9Types Co. LLC. It's created and produced by Stephanie Barron Hall, with editing support from Brandon Hall, and additional support from Crit's Collaborations. Thanks to Dr. Dreamchip for our amazing theme song, and you can also check out all of their music on Spotify.